All right, Derek, we missed a week here on our podcast.
Did we miss two? I think we might miss two.
Is it going that fast? So,
I think so.
This is a podcast that we, in some shape or form, have wanted to do for a long time. When you first came on as an intern, we talked about kind of taking a research eye to the Dave Ramsey strategy as far as wealth accumulation and also distribution, because I think that's important too. Ultimately, we are saving money because we want this ultimately to provide income and enhance our lives. So I think you always build with the end in mind. But we have wanted to do this podcast to kind of test some of the strategies that Dave Ramsey offers. I want to start by saying, Derek, that Dave Ramsey has done wonders for helping people get out of debt. A lot of people have benefited from his get out of debt solutions. His idea,
I would say me included.
Yeah.
Like when I was in school, I was very dedicated to paying down student loans while I was in school, almost exclusively because of Dave Ramsey stuff that I've seen in high school, and then also just content that he's put out while I was in college.
Yeah. And the concept is very basic, right? He gets into the snowball effect to getting out of debt. And that is, if I've got a series of credit card debts, I'm not going to pick the one with the lowest interest rate, or I'm sorry, the highest interest rate. Rather, I'm going to pick the one with the lowest balance, and I'm going to pay that one off first. I'm going to make minimum payments on the other, dedicate most of my money to paying off the minimum balance or the lowest balance. And then once that's paid off, I take the proceeds I was sending to that one, and I snowball it into the next lowest one, and I begin to steamroll it, because debt investing, there's a great portion of that is emotional, right? Not just math. Mm-hmm. There's emotional to that, and when you pay off that lowest debt, you get that emotional win, right? And you start picking up pace. So I like that idea. I think it works. It's worked obviously for a lot of people. I will say I have some disagreement with Dave Ramsey when it gets to outside the debt window. Once we start looking at ways to accumulate assets and ultimately distribute them to ourselves, distribution stage, I've got quite a bit of differences with Dave. And so you had turned me on to a YouTube video. It was a short 8-minute YouTube video that was part of the Dave Ramsey show. A caller called in, and I'm going to hand this over to you. Why don't you kind of lay that out?
Wrote in. Yeah. So he wrote in saying that he was nearing retirement. I believe he was 61 years old. He had $180,000 in cash and then an undisclosed amount in a retirement account. We can kind of assume it's going to be a decent chunk considering that he has $180,000 in cash. Just a basic assumption. And he was worried about his retirement savings dwindling, like with the market being down last year. And the conclusion that Dave Ramsey's co-host, as well as Dave Ramsey, came to is that he should basically just put, like, why is he sitting on so much cash? He should basically put all of that cash into the Dave Ramsey investment allocation. Again, he never came out and said that, but he said that, or they both said that that money should be invested because you're losing money to inflation. The Dave Ramsey investment allocation is equal weight among 4 different style factors, I guess. One is growth, another is growth in income, the other one is aggressive growth, and then international. So split up equal weight amongst those four holdings, which I mean is like super opposed to like something that we would be doing, and probably something against that, or something against we would advise at this current point to just dump $180,000 into growth stocks when you're about to retire in 4 years.
Right. Well,
and then there was some other stuff that we're going to get into, but that's basically laying out what the topic of the video was.
So he makes a lot of statements in there, and I wanted to break those statements down one by one and just see the validity to this. I have some concern, obviously, with radio podcast shows like that, right? Because a caller calls in, he says the situation, and they're giving advice without knowing the rest of the situation.
Sorry to interrupt, but he wrote in, so it's not even like it was a back and forth.
Sure.
Where they could give feedback on it. He wrote it. Yeah, just a little detail there.
The only data point that we know, Derek, is that he has $180,000 in cash and an undisclosed amount in the 401k. He says he's going to be retiring soon. We don't know if soon means next year. We don't know if soon means in 10 years. We also don't know his debt situation, right? We don't know if he has dependent children. We don't know if he has somebody that is struggling with health issues that he's taking care of. We don't know if he's going through a divorce. We don't know a lot of things about him, right? So the recommendation was to stop being stupid and take 180,000 and put it in the market, or put it in the Dave Ramsey strategy, which is essentially an all equity for the most part strategy.
Sure, right.
So, and his rationale behind that is that he said himself, I don't time the market, but I do know that there's only been one other time in history where a down market year has not been followed up by 2 up market years.
I have the exact quote. Every single down year in the stock market but one was followed by a record 2-year rise.
So when you say a record...
I can get into why that's wrong for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, number one, obviously that's not true, right? You can look in when I back tested the S&P 500, you can look in recent times, and there was a stretch of time between 2000 to 2003, roughly, that was 3 consecutive down years in the market. And then you can go back to the 70s, and there are actually 2 consecutive years that are a down market. We know in our last podcast, Eric, we talked about the odds of losing money in the market. And we said that over a 20-year stretch, we have never had a period of time where we have lost money in the market. But over a 10-year stretch, there certainly is a period of time. 5-year stretch, obviously, yes, that's the case. Just to revisit those numbers, if I invest in the S&P 500 for 5 years, my bell curve is either a positive 28% return or a negative 11.7% return. And at 10 years, it's still negative, potentially, at negative 4.1% versus 17.6%. So obviously that's a statement that's not correct.
Yeah, so it's kind of based on bad math as well. So followed by a record 2-year rise. That's kind of like when he says that, it sounds like kind of like referring to what you were saying, where if you stay invested for 3 years, it doesn't matter where you are on the bell curve. And if you have a down year in your first year, you're like guaranteed to have positive growth over that 3-year stretch, which is not true because it falls into the incorrect math that a lot of people talk about in finance, where if you're down 50%, you think you only need a 50% return to recover, but that's not true. You need 100% if your account gets cut in half. So I just wanted to do like a real world example of, this was the drawdown in 2008. So starting with a $100,000 account, the first drawdown was 38%. The actual peak to trough drawdown of 2008 was 50%, but this was just the annual returns for the S&P. So the first year was down 38%. So that puts you at 61,000. And then in that year, you would have had a 23% return, which puts you at 75,000. And then another positive return, I don't have the percentage here, but that would put you at 85,000. So over that 3-year stretch, just because you had 2 years of record growth after that first down year, that doesn't mean you're up on your account. That just means that the S&P had positive returns in those following 2 years.
Yeah.
And then, so even if you fall out or like remove the claim of 2 record years, which is, I mean, he said 2 record years of growth, which, I mean, I don't even know if that's happened once, where you have a drawdown and then the next year you have a record return in the S&P, let alone 2 years. But the stat is actually false. In 1929, 1930, 31, 32, 37, 39, 40, 46, 1960, 1969, 1973, 2000, and 2001 were all down years, followed by not 2 years of growth and more than likely another year of drawdown after that first year of drawdown. Yeah. So, I mean, that stat is just incorrect in basically every interpretation.
I mean, even the strategy itself, the Dave Ramsey strategy, doesn't hold water in the sense that the allocation that you laid out, 25% growth in income, 25% growth, 25% aggressive growth, and then 25% international. If you read the book, he talks about these strategies. You get into these mutual funds, and they average a 12% return. Backtest the stock market over. There are years, certainly, over a 2 or 3, 4 year stretch of time where we exceed 12% return. But over a long duration, I don't think you're going to find the stock market does a 12% return. And certainly internationally, we're not doing a 12% return into that. And so if you look at the Dave Ramsey strategy as a whole, I'm investing this way. I'm dollar cost averaging into it. I'm earning an average return of 12%. And then the nightmare, in my opinion, is the distribution portion of it, in the sense that he says, okay, your account's earning an average of 12% return. We can withdraw 8% and be able to adjust that for inflation. I mean, any financial planner will show you through a Monte Carlo simulation that an 8% distribution from a retirement account is a recipe for blowing through this account between 11 to 21 years. I just did the back test with SEI. You can use a lot of other distribution Monte Carlo simulations. And the reason for that, as you know, Derek, our audience might not know, if I'm averaging a 12% return and I'm pulling 8%, why doesn't that last forever? Well, because there's a phenomenon known as the sequence of returns. And what I mean by that is, Derek, you told me that in 2008, the market from peak to trough declined 50%, and it finished down about 38% for that year. If I'm additionally, on top of that, if I'm withdrawing 8% from the account, I'm compounding that loss, right? And we have just talked about there are many examples of being multiple down years in the stock market. So what ends up happening is the principal has eroded enough and I'm withdrawing from it, and it doesn't allow me, I'm stressing it too much and my account actually can't recover to produce that income. And eventually what happens is I deplete it because I'm pulling more out than the account is producing. In that particular statement,
yes,
video that you sent me, he also said a way to prevent yourself from freaking out during the distribution phase was to only draw the interest from the account, right? And let the principal ride, is what he said. And that's also a recipe for disaster. So if we know that there has been 3-year stretches of time when the market's down, are you going to go 3 years without withdrawing any income in retirement?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I actually ran math on this as well, because I was just curious about like what would actually happen. So in that 2008 example that I gave you, it basically, if you would have followed the next 2 years, it would have put you at around $85,000. That's if you weren't withdrawing it, to your point. But then like the actual peak in 2007 and then it drew down, it took 4 years to recover. So imagine if you're taking distributions along the way, it would have taken you much, much longer to actually recover, if it ever does, depending on the rate at which you're withdrawing from it. But so let's just go do another experiment here. So let's say, or I guess it's going through a couple different scenarios. So let's say you have $1 million in the retirement account and $180,000 in cash. The worst thing that happens if you just keep the cash in your checking account, savings account, or whatever, it's just that you miss out on a little bit of gain. All these fears in the market, all these things that are pointing to a recession in the second half of this year, it's all just fear, and none of it came true. The worst thing that happened is you missed out on a couple percentage points of gain. And then scenario 2, if you have $1 million and then you still keep that $180,000 in cash, but there is a recession, you could theoretically, depending on his income, you could just draw from the $180,000 in cash and let that $1 million, let's say it gets cut in half. Let's say we'll use a worst case scenario, it gets cut to $500,000. You could probably use that $180,000 to generate income from yourself along with Social Security until your account recovers to a level where it's sustainable to continue that withdrawal. Scenario 3 is if you have $1 million, you dump the $180,000 into stocks and it gets cut in half. And then you go from basically having a bulletproof financial plan, assuming like an average income, you have Social Security and you have to pull 3 to 5% from that $1 million. You go from having a bulletproof plan that you won't deplete the account, you'll probably have some left over for your kids, into you're on very shaky ground, you're probably going to have to work for a couple more years, or you're going to have to dramatically change your lifestyle, all because of just a simple error of duration mismatch, which is what we've been talking about a lot recently, and asset allocation. It's a very simple error to sidestep. It's just a basic risk management principle that if you're about to retire in 5 years, if you need the money, don't put it in growth assets, which are super long duration. We're talking about 10, 20-year duration assets, and you need the money in 5 years. It's just a very basic risk management practice that you can do to sidestep potentially making the last 20 years of your life extremely stressful. And you're talking about you have to like ask your kids for money or whatever. It's just like you could avoid all of these headaches just by very basic risk management practices.
Another thing to think about is when he says that you should let the principal ride and only live off the interest, right? Look at that strategy that he's talking about. Growth in income, growth, aggressive growth, international. If you had to estimate, and he's using mutual funds to put these in, if you had to estimate, what do you think the annual yield of something like that would be?
Like the dividend interest coming off of those?
Yeah,
like less than 1%. We're talking about like growth. It's like we're talking about like all growth stocks, yeah.
So let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say it's 2%, which we know it's not, right? Aggressive growth is going to tell you that doesn't pay a dividend.
Yeah.
Growth doesn't pay a dividend. I mean, look at the NASDAQ. It does pay a dividend. Nothing that is going to, it's going to be less than 1% in those things, right? If I look at the Fidelity Contra Fund, that just, I believe, started paying a dividend, and it's around 0.5% or something when it pays.
The NASDAQ does not. I just looked it up.
The NASDAQ doesn't pay a dividend?
Yeah, QQQ does not pay a dividend, yeah.
So how much principal would you have to accumulate for this strategy to pay you any sort of meaningful income that you could actually live off of? You're talking multiple millions and millions of dollars in order to have any sort of, and then you would have to probably live a frugal life on top of that.
Yeah. If we're talking about like a 1% to 2% distribution, it's just, again, it's just bad math. Like the math just doesn't work out with the type of stuff that you're talking about investing in. I mean, a growth in income, that's going to kick off some income, but it's going to be 25% of your account. Let's say 5% of 25% of your account. Again, it's just not going to generate enough income for you to be able to sustainably withdraw from that. When you're talking about like, there's no room for error in this situation because you're not going to be 85 years old filling out job applications. It's like there's very little room for error. So it's not like, oh, this has a 50% chance of working because we're just going to have a baked-in assumption that the market's going to recover completely in 4 years. It's like you can take that risk, but it's just, do you want to bet the last 20 years of your life, or at least the stress of the last 20 years of your life, that historically this thing has happened, so it's going to happen in the future? You could take that bet, but it's just, it seems like it's very easy to sidestep, again, to make that point.
Well, part of the problem, too, is hosting a radio show, right? Mm-hmm. And so he gives advice, and then as soon as the caller hangs up or as soon as he's done with that segment, it's over. It's out of sight and out of mind, right? The individual is making financial decisions based on this 3-minute take that he's doing on the radio show to get listeners, ultimately affecting his life, right? Mm-hmm. His peace of mind, all this kind of stuff. The other thing that I think that we have to consider is a lot of this advice, especially in recent times, using these mutual funds, using index funds, is based on the past 15, 20 years, right? And what happened during that time? It was an unprecedented time in history where interest rates were near record lows and the stock market was booming. Historically, we don't see that, right? Mm-hmm. Historically, that's a time that I wouldn't expect for my retirement to continue on for the next 30 years. I think you're going to have a situation where other asset classes are beneficial to have into the account. Right now, if you look at our account, we're have plenty of T-bills in that account because for the first time they're paying over 5%. We have stock as well. We have precious metals that are in there. We have a lot of things in there that, in my mind, a retirement account where I'm taking distributions from should have potentially 5 different asset classes in there. I want my stock position. I want my bonds. I want real estate. I want precious metals. And I want a healthy position of cash. Here in this instance, to your point, Derek, this individual had a healthy portion of cash. And by the way, having it in a bank doesn't necessarily mean I have to have it in a checking account. I could have that in a money market account, earning a 4% rate of return at this point in time. So absolutely terrible advice for both accumulation and distribution. Give him his credit for the getting out of debt, but a nightmare when it comes to actually managing the money.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say was he uses like the fallacy of like appeal to tradition, where like things have happened like this in the past, so they're going to happen like this in the future. And then they made this point over and over again where they were like, look like if you're a student of history, look at the chart. It always comes back. It always comes back. It always comes back. And it's like, and then he says, he said, historically, you're stupid if you don't invest money in a down year because the next 2 years will be record growth. He says, historically, you're stupid if you don't invest money after a down market. And again, like historically, I would say you're unintelligent. I don't think I wouldn't say stupid, but because you're looking at a time frame, it looks like he's looking at the time frame post 1990 where that stat actually holds true. But then zoom out, go all the way back to the 1930s, and then you could even go back further, like go back to like some of these data sets that like go back to like the 1800s, 1700s. We're talking about like we're on the precipice of, like, if you look at Ray Dalio's research of like the long-term debt cycle, like we could very well be on the precipice of like a shift in like all these like global dynamics, a shift in the changing world order, as he likes to call it. It's like we could be very well at the precipice of this. So you have to start looking at these like super long-term time horizons, and don't just look at the United States just because we're the global superpower now. 20 years in the future, like we don't know what's going to happen with the dollar. We don't know what's going to happen with, I mean, fill in the blank with all these uncertainties that are going to happen over the next 20 years. It's like, so you should probably look global. You should probably look on a longer time frame. So you can't say go back 30 years, and if you don't base the last 20 years of your life on a very small data set, historically you're stupid. Like that's just, it's not fair. It's not a fair criticism.
Yeah. All right, Dirk, I think I guess our advice would be you read the Dave Ramsey book. His debt's amazing. Mm-hmm. Do your own research. Get a second opinion when it comes to accumulating. And
one last thing. The asset allocation that he's proposing is not something that he follows himself. He has like over probably $100 million in real estate. He has his business, which is a part of his portfolio. His personal net worth is not 100% in equities. So it's just, again, it's just nonsense to tell somebody else to do that with their entire net worth. It's just, okay, that's the last thing I'll say.
And call somebody a dummy along the way, right?
Yeah, right. It's nonsense.
So I read something. There's this book that I read called The Philosophy of Wealth. And I would recommend anybody read that. I think it does. It's very basic. It actually doesn't have a lot of technical stuff in it. It's more human emotion, how we act, right? And he said something in there that was pretty profound, but very, very simple. And he was talking about this idea. There's two types of people that have money. There's rich people, and then there's wealthy people. And he defined rich as high income, right? If I'm rich, I can afford nice things. If I'm wealthy, and he said the biggest dividend that wealthiness or money can buy is control of your time, right? And I think about that. That to me is my definition of financial independence, where I work because I want to, not because I have to make the payment on my mortgage. Mm-hmm. So, and he's talked about this paradox of the man in the car. And he said that, so if somebody goes out and spends $100,000 on a
Porsche,
Chevy Tahoe, Porsche, whatever, Chevy Tahoe, name the vehicle, right? Because nowadays you could buy a Jeep Cherokee and spend $100,000.
Sure,
if you,
sure.
Right? So somebody buys that vehicle, and they are using that vehicle to project what they want to project themselves as far as their level of success, right? Mm-hmm. And most of the time, though, when you drive down the road and you see that Porsche, or you don't necessarily make an assumption about the person. You might note the car, but when we go and buy a car in order to project our status, to show that we're wealthy, right, or show that we're rich, the only data point that we have is that the person who bought that car is now $100,000 less wealthy than what they were before. And I know that's extreme, because actually they could sell the car and get the equity in the car. But that's the only data point we know. We know nothing about their debt level. We know nothing about their income stream. We know nothing about anything else that's going on in their life, other than they purchased the car, and either through debt they're $100,000 less rich, or if they paid cash in it, they've got $100,000 that they gave to somebody else to pay for it. And I thought that was it's actually, I've never thought about it that way. Obviously, I know there's, if you look at The Millionaire Next Door, like there's a difference between wealthy and rich. Mm-hmm. And this is what I'll end with. Another thing that I never thought about before. He said, or I thought about it, but I haven't put it into words this way. He said, wealth is not what you see. Wealth is what you can't see. It's the car that wasn't purchased. It was the upgrade, the first class that wasn't done. It was the, you name it, right? It was the, instead of buying it, I put it in my bank. And now it's an asset that creates dividends and interest and passive income to me that gives me over control of the ultimate thing that all of us want, and that's time, more time.
Yeah, the goal is to be rich, not, or be wealthy, not look wealthy. I mean, if that could be a part of your goal. If you truly are wealthy, you might want to also project a certain level of that. But the ultimate end goal for most people is just they want that some element of that time freedom where like they have autonomy over their own choices, and they're not they work because they want to, they don't work because they have to pay rent. I think that's like there's certain layers of financial freedom, and I would say that's definitely the first one, where your income surpasses your liabilities and you have some stuff to set aside. That's the first level of financial freedom. And then the second level would be like your investments pay for your lifestyle. And then the third level would be like your investments, like the interest on your investments are growing at a rate that you can't deplete it from. Something like that illustration there. But yeah, definitely I would consider that first level financial freedom in its own right.
Do you know that Rihanna was near bankruptcy at one point in time, and she sued her financial advisor? And her financial advisor made the statement of, I didn't think I needed to tell you that if you spent money to buy things, eventually all you would end up with was things. But actually, for a lot of people, that is something that we need to talk about, right? I mean, you look at the United States right now, we're near record levels in credit card debt. Mm-hmm. I mean, we spend forward a lot of these things to project this lifestyle. We're a consumer-based economy where we need people to spend, so that's encouraged. And there's plenty of commercials out there and marketing to get us to spend, right?
Yeah.
So interesting. That's a book that I would highly recommend. They put some things into almost like bumper sticker type stuff, like broken down to very, very basic understanding and knowledge that anybody can understand. You don't have to be a financial guru.
For sure. Yeah, I like even somebody that probably has more financial acumen than the average person. I still like the super bare bones, boiled down to like the very like basic principles of financial or personal finance and stuff. I still really enjoy reading that stuff. Can we talk about the mortgage thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So there was an executive order signed by the administration that basically charges higher mortgage fees if you have a credit score over 740. If you have a credit score of 740 and you put 15 to 20% down on the house, you are paying 75% higher in fees than you were before. It's not like you were paying 1%, now you're paying 76%, but if you were paying 1%, now you're paying 1.75%. And if you have a credit score of 620 and you put 5% down, you get a 1.75% discount on fees. So if you're paying 2.75, now you're paying 1% in mortgage fees. So what are your thoughts on that? I think it's absolutely insane, but go ahead.
It is insane, and this is going to be a tough one to avoid political ideology on this. But number one, obviously we're incentivizing people for having poor credit, and we're disincentivizing somebody who has paid off their debts and they manage their finances really well, right? Let me, if I could, be devil's advocate on this, in the sense that
cool, I like it.
What if we want to rebuild a city like Detroit? Mm-hmm. Really, the only way that you can do that is if you can get money to flow into those sectors, or incentivize people to start building nice buildings, or update their houses or whatever like that. So that would be my devil's advocate, in the sense that I could see in this distressed area where maybe as a whole populations have a little bit lower credit score, it would incentivize them to be able to get that mortgage to buy that house, or to get that line of credit in order to redo their house and make it nice. However, though, I see this as, actually you brought this to my attention, Derek. This is the first step towards greater control. I mean, ultimately, I'll be quite frank. I see a lot of these policies as a step to destroy the system, not elevate it.
Mm-hmm.
and I don't personally I don't see how I could look at that otherwise and tell me that that's not true. Insurance companies, banks, all have this data that the insurance companies will base their rates off of a credit score. And it makes sense. If I have a higher credit score, the chances of me turning in a claim is probably less because maybe I have
Same
the cash
with
on hand.
renting an apartment. They do credit checks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, right. And so the data's there, right? And so obviously if we're giving better rates to people with lower credit scores, if I've got a lower credit score and I get a loan, my chance of default on that loan is higher than if somebody who has a higher credit score on average. And that's the case, right? So I don't understand it. I see this as a first step towards, number one, wealth distribution. Two, I mean, it's a hop and a skip, Derek, for me saying that if you don't do this, right? If you don't follow ESG investing, if you don't,
if your
right.
You went over your carbon quota for the month, yeah.
I mean, yeah, and you could see it where it could get out of hand, where all of a sudden, if I'm not into ESG investing, my carbon footprint, whatever I'm not towing the line for, my mortgage could be 10% or something ridiculous, right?
Right. Sorry, finish your point, sorry.
No, that was my point, where they basically use your checkbook to make you become a slave to whatever they want to do.
Sure. Yeah, so it's basically like using weaponizing the financial system to enforce. Like this particular instance is a social outcome, but just basically it's in the finance world, but you're not using financial metrics in the finance world. Like you have other goals associated with it. Like that's the main problem. I don't really have a problem with if you strip out all of the financial stuff. I have no problem with people that have lower incomes getting a break. I have no problem with that. It's just that these are like objective systems that we've decided upon, like the credit score system, which is not perfect, and it has its own host of issues. But basically, like we've all decided on like an objective metric of credit worthiness, essentially, and then you're muddying the waters with these social goals, and that's my main beef with it. It's just give an inch, take a mile, I think, as well, where it always starts with something that everybody can accept, because we're talking about plus or minus a couple $1,000s on a mortgage. So I think the number was like, if you buy a $400,000 house, you're going to be paying like $40 a month. So it's a pretty small step, but it's that give an inch, take a mile, where everybody accepts this, and then they can push as far until there's resistance, and then they back off, and then they push some more, and then they back off. It's just you kind of have to draw a line in the sand in the future, like where it's going to be, or you'll just get steamrolled by that ever encroaching progress of basically encroaching on your freedom, essentially, is basically how I see it.
So who's going to backstop this? Is the government backstopping it? Because we know that we know by statistics.
It's not the rate of interest you're paying on your mortgage. It's your mortgage fees. So that's where it comes in. So it's not like I guess it kind of does, but it's not going to be a big giant swing in one direction. It's just going to be like a slight nudge. So when I first read it, I thought that like basically people were getting a discount on their interest rate, which is not true. It's basically just the fee that you pay over top of the mortgage. It has something to do with Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac of how they do mortgages, essentially. They just do the fee on top of whatever, like baked into your closing costs, essentially. So it's not going to be a big thing where now all of these people have access to all these higher risk home buyers are going to have access to all this cheap money, and it's like not the inverse as well, where all of these responsible borrowers are going to be like closed out of the market. It's not that, but it's a nudge in that direction, a very small nudge, I would even add. But I mean, still, it's that give an inch, take a mile.
I would agree. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where ultimately how this actually makes a big enough difference for somebody to buy a house or not buy a house. Mm-hmm. And I think that
it's just seeding ground. That's right. Yes. It's because it doesn't benefit anybody really, and it hurts people that are responsible for sure. It's not like life changing or anything, but it does negatively impact people that are responsible. And now they have leeway to maybe encroach a little bit more in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, so it's executive order, so this is into law right now?
It goes into effect May 1st.
May 1st.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, I don't know. I think as time goes on, I think we already have, the banking system already has some cracks in it, right? And and definitely this year has been with the failure of 3 banks. We've seen that come out and manifest itself. I think I am somebody who kind of follows this and pays attention to currencies and things like that. I have obviously some concern over the long-term health of our financial system. And I'm not advocating that somebody go out and get into Bitcoin or gold or anything else. But I think that you're going to have there's going to be enough people who see what is going on and just see that the path that we're on doesn't make mathematical sense. It doesn't make financial sense. And it seems like we are on shaky ground and we're doing whatever we can to get more shakier.
Yeah, right. Like there's no sane person in the room that's like screaming stop, or at least no sane person in the room that actually could influence anything that's saying stop, let's divert course. Because if you look at, okay, I'm gonna try my best not to be scary or anything, but the United States is structurally insolvent. If you look at the amount of money that we bring in and the amount of money that is already earmarked and is already calculated based on like how much we have to pay in interest, if you look at like projections, unless we're going to grow at like an 8% clip in GDP, we are structurally insolvent. Like this is a train that is headed towards something not good, and it's basically just a matter of time before that something happens. But yeah, sorry, I don't want to be scary, but I mean that is this current state of affairs where there's no way that we can basically get ourselves out of the mess that we've created for ourselves through money printing, through debt, through subsidizing all these programs. It's just not in the cards at this point. So it's basically mitigating the damage and about how long this can go on, but it ultimately will come to an end, I feel like. Not the end of the United States or anything, but I'm saying like something will happen as a result of this.
Yeah, I mean it's no different than a household, right? If you got mom and dad living in the household with kids, and mom and dad have a spending problem, and they do nothing to correct it, they can go out and get more income. They can go out and delay the inevitable. But ultimately, if our expenses exceed what we're taking in, there's an end to that. So it doesn't end pretty.
I mean, it's to the point where, or it's going to get to the point where the amount of money that we're generating in tax revenue cannot even pay for the interest on the debt. And then, I mean, so right now, like, just think about like actually, I'm going to pull up the debt clock because this is like the best website ever.
Especially if you don't want to sleep at night.
Yeah. If you look at the craziest one that people don't talk about is the unfunded liabilities. Like people talk about the debt, the national debt, about how much we're going to have to pay back, which we're never going to pay back. That number is not as scary to me as the unfunded liabilities. So if you think about like Social Security, that is money in the future that is already spent. So somebody that's 50 years old right now is going to get Social Security. That money is already spent in the future. And the amount of unfunded liability, and Social Security is just one program, but all of the social programs, and probably a lot of the, there's probably other programs that are included in this basket as well. But it's $187 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Like, what are we going to do from now until 20 years into the future to grow our GDP at a clip that we can generate tax revenues to pay that down? When, especially like when you consider like the interest rates now, let's say the Federal Reserve pulls it off and they can keep interest rates at like 3% for the next 5 decades. I mean, so what are we going to do? Like maybe AI is going to actually save us all and bring on this whole era of prosperity and productivity. But outside of that, there's nothing on the horizon that's going to like dramatically increase GDP, dramatically increase productivity, that's going to be able to reverse that train or reverse course on that. It's just very simple math.
Maybe there is some hope there with AI that we can put the computer in charge there and they can make tough decisions that actually need to be made that put our country in a more financially stable situation, or at least on the path to that.
I don't put much faith in AI, but I mean, I hope it's a benevolent AI that it's just looking out for the best interests of humanity. But if you are a fan of sci-fi, you know that it's not the case.
Yeah. So this episode, Derek, we beat up on Dave Ramsey a little bit, and we also beat up on the financial stability of our country. Hopefully we didn't scare too many people, but
well, hopefully everyone just dropped off on the first half. They were tired of it.
Yeah, that's true.
They were tired of us here or talking about Dave Ramsey.
All right, Derek, where can people find us on social media?
As always, thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, at Crosby Advisory. Get clips from the episode and YouTube Shorts, YouTube Crosby Advisory. Subscribe to the newsletter by going to crosbyadvisory.com/contact, and we will see you guys next week.
Keep in mind that Crosby Advisory is a registered investment advisor in the state of Ohio, Texas, and Florida. At any time, you can request our forms ADV 2A and 2B, which go into the business practices and qualifications of Crosby Advisory. Today on this show, we mentioned specific securities, and that is not a recommendation for you to go out and buy them or sell them. Do your own homework and make sure they are suitable for you. Keep in mind, investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal, and you should carefully consider all risks and fees before making an investment.